Good evening, everyone. I am Alicia Poletto, and I'm Chris Assistant on the City of Rome course at the VSR. And today I have the pleasure to introduce to you Simone Quilici, the current director of the Parco Archeologico dell'Appia Antica, for a lecture that strides a little bit from archaeology and ancient history seen from an academic perspective. Simone Quilici holds a PhD from the University of Florence and a specialization from La Sapienza University of Rome, and is a landscape architect who has been dealing with issues concerning the promotion, conservation, and outreach of archaeological sites. And before his position at the Parco dell'Appia Antica, he has worked a lot on the outreach of the Via Francigena. So we are going to hear about roads a lot tonight. Alongside his position at the Parco dell'Appia Antica, he also holds a chair at the American University of Rome, where he teaches management of cultural heritage, of which we are going to hear a lot tonight. So without much further ado, I welcome Simone Quilici tonight for a lecture on other issues. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for the kind invitation. It was very much appreciated. It's always a big opportunity for us working in public administration to have time to show our work, and also, I would say, in particular, to think and analyze our work. So this invitation is very important for all of us of the Archaeological Park of Appia Antica. I'd like to start my presentation with this picture, the one on the left. The one on the right is a bit ancient. It wasn't taken by me. The one on the left, I took it almost 10 years ago, in year 2015, and you can see some people walking there. I was in front of them, because in summer 2015, the famous journalist and writer Paolo Rumiz decided to walk along the ancient Via Appia from Rome to Brindisi, recounting the experience in a series of articles subsequently collected in a book called Appia. The initiative had the positive effect of awakening the interest of public opinion and administration in the Regina Viarum and in possible actions aiming at its recovery. One of the immediate results was the establishment in year 2016 of the Appia Antica Archaeological Park, which I have the honor of directing. The park manages the road and its monuments in the stretch south of Rome up to the Castelli Romani. The park has been also assigned the important task of coordinating the enhancement of the entire route from Rome to Brindisi. But what exactly does it mean to recover an ancient route along its entire path? What are the criteria and methods for recovering the landscape of an ancient road with a high historical and symbolic value and a complex evolution? There are three possible interpretations that facilitate our task. The road can be seen as a territorial asset. So we can say the path as a connection between sites, so its function. But the road is also a historical archaeological asset, so the trace as permanence of the past. And finally, the road as a landscape asset. And so we focus on the sign as a significant image within a framework. Talking about its role of connection, as you all know, Via Appia was a military road built since 312 before Christ by Censor Appio Claudius, known as the Blind, during the Samnite Wars. Its construction was prolonged over time in parallel with the expansion of Roman rule. Here you see a map, an archaeological map by Thomas Ashby, so I suppose it's very important to remind him here in this place, as all you know, the importance of Thomas Ashby for the history of this institute and for archaeology in general in Italy and in Rome. Around 110 AD, the original route will be progressively abandoned in the stretch between Benevento and Brindisi in favor of the new Via Appia Traiana that you can see in this map. The consolidation of the Roman Empire determined a first functional transformation of the road, which from a military purpose took on the role of commercial and travel connection for Greece and the Middle East. As you know, again, in order to facilitate travel along the road, a network of services were developed, And here in the Tabula Potengeriana, you can see very well, together with the mutaciones for changing horses every 10 miles, the mansiones or staciones at a distance of a day's journey from one to the other, places equipped for the overnight stays of travelers, and which sometimes coincided with pre-existing villages or settlements, while other times they were created specifically for the cursus publicus, often becoming over time new cities. In the stretch up to Terracina, the road was almost a single straight line, measuring around 90 kilometers, meant for connecting as fast as possible Rome to the battlefields. The decline of the Appia began during the 5th century with the collapse of the organization of the Roman state, the lack of maintenance, the swamping of vast areas of the plains, the barbarian invasions, the Gothic-Byzantine War, and later the Saracen raids on the coast pushed the population to abandon the plain and to shelter themselves on safer hills. The central-southern connections in medieval times were guaranteed by the Piedmont Road under the Lepini Mountains and by the Via Casilina, and you can see this on the left-hand map. Not all archaeologists agree, but many historians say that in medieval times, the Via Appia Traiana became a pilgrimage road used in some cases by crusaders headed to the Holy Land. In modern times, during fascism, the construction of the State Road number 7, Appia, represents a true reinvention. The current state road, established in year 1928 by the newly formed Autonomous State Road Company, follows a route that only partially coincides with that of the ancient Via Appia. The new route connects some important urban centers such as Avellino and Potenza, that located at a considerable distance from the ancient Roman road. Talking about its physical consistency, so we stopped talking about the first interpretation, the road as a connection. Now we talk about its physical evidence. Talking about its physical consistency, in the outskirts of Rome, the ancient road was paved in very hard black basaltic stone, derived from the solidified lavas of the Alban Hills, and in more distant regions, from the stone material more easily found on the route. The paved carriage was 4.2 meters wide, 14 feet, a canonical measure for major roads, which easily allowed carriages to cross in both directions. The street was then flanked by sidewalks made of smaller stones, which allowed for comfortable pedestrian transit, with widths that were more commonly maintained at 2 or 3 meters on each side, but which could vary depending on the intensity of pedestrian traffic. Between the 1500s and 1800s, restorations were undertaken on the Appian Way, both in Papal and Naples kingdoms, aiming at maintaining the route. In year 1833, Carlo Fea's proposal for the restoration of a Via Appia from Rome to Brindisi demonstrates how the Via Appia was still considered a living road. Important are restorations of the Duke of Alcalá in the mid-1500s, for Philip II, King of Spain, the interventions by Charles of Bourbon around 1738, by Ferdinand IV in 1767, by Pope Pius VI in the Pontine Marshes starting since 1767, and again the grandiose works in the 19th century, which culminated in the neo-Egyptian style bridge over the Garigliano, and you can see the picture right-hand top, completed in year 1832, and in the Aricia Viaduct in the guise of an ancient aqueduct inaugurated in year 1853. Archaeological research was promoted by the papal government under Pope Pius VII and Pius IX, and various scholars, including Carlo Fea, Antonio Nibbi, Ennio Quirino Visconti, work on the Appia with artists such as Canova and architects such as Valadier. Despite the extreme importance of the topic, the most surprising observation is that even today, there are few systematic studies on the entire route of the Via Appia from Rome to Brindisi. The reconstruction of the route itself is subject, still now in some sections, of conflicting hypotheses, particularly in the Irpin area, so in the Campania region nowadays. The most complete and rich monograph, even if largely imprecise from a scientific point of view, dates back to none other than 1745 by Francesco Maria Pretilli, and you can see here a map of that study. We come now to the road as a landscape asset. The shape of a road is, of course, a line. This, however, can in turn take on different aspects in form of a straight, broken, curved, serpentine, etc. The path of the Via Appia is linked to the interaction of two components, the orography of the places and the identification of the shortest possible route between the nodes to be connected. In the flat stretches, in the absence of obstacles, the road takes on a straight line. In the coastal stretches with mountainous hinterland close to the sea, the road follows the coastline. In the mid-coast and ridge sections, the road takes on a sinuous layout linked to the level curves. The landscape elements crossed by the road are grafted onto this continuous line. Minor roads, canals, tree lines, hedges. The relationship between the road and its surrounding landscape is significantly differentiated along the route. In many sections, the Via Appia cuts the signs of a territory. In others, it accommodates them. In still others, it constitutes the ordering trace. There are also many cases in which landscape palimpsest has erased the road itself or has superimposed new elements on it, in harmony or in contrast with the track below. The example of a route of the Appian Way in the Pontine Plain, you can see the map on the left, is a significant case of a road that diagonally cuts the orthogonal architectural structure of a Roman centuriation. The subsequent pontifical reclamation work, which involved the construction of the Imperiale roads, the set of canal and road placed orthogonally to the Via Appia at a constant distance of 1 mile, constitutes an example of how the road constituted the ordering track of the new comb-shaped agricultural structure, which cancelled the one from the Roman times, which was rotated by 45 degrees compared to the new one. In numerous cases, the inclusion of new elements constituting the landscape characters has enhanced the sign of a road. This is the case, for example, of a double row planting of elm trees carried out in the Pontine countryside at the time of late 18th century restorations of the Via Appia. You can see this in the image to the right top. Towards the end of the 1920s, at the time of establishment of the autonomous state road company and the adaptation of the Via Appia as a state road, number 7, the elms were replaced, in line with the fascist rhetoric of the myth of ancient Rome, by pine trees that still line the road today. Landscape that framed the Via Appia has been shown to travelers on the Grand Tour for centuries. The journey along the Appian Way was common not only for the beauty, for the brightness of its landscapes and the richness of the ruins of pagan and Christian monuments, but also because it was the road to Naples and Sicily, two traditional destinations of the Italienische Reise, to use the title of Goethe's diary. Important travel reports along the Via Appia consist of a collection of drawings by Carlo Labruzzi, who in 1789, accompanying Sir Richard Cole reached Benevento, where they were forced to interrupt the journey. The image of the Appia changed considerably after the first organic excavation, documentation, and restoration of the street proposed by Camillo Jacobini, minister of Pius IX. The works were carried out in year 1850-1853 by Luigi Canina, architect and archaeologist, between the 4th and 9th mile of the road. Appointed Commissioner of Antiquities of Rome in 1839, Luigi Canina proceeded with careful documentation and planning. The road was expropriated with a buffer zone of 10 meters on both sides, delimiting it with dry stone walls, the so-called macere. Canina's idea was to create an open-air museum made up of reconstruction of brick walls or restoration of ancient structure on which to reassemble the marbles found in the excavations, the epigraphs, the sculpture, and you can see the color picture at the center. But what was the landscape that Canina imagined? It was not, and still is not, easy to imagine the appearance of Appian Way landscape in its various sections at the time of its construction and in the following centuries. Almost nothing remains of the original landscape. Natural landscape has certainly changed considerably, given the profound climatic transformations that have occurred over a period of approximately 2 millennia. But at the same time, the anthropic landscape, both urban and agricultural, is also profoundly different. Thanks to the imaginative reconstructions, Luigi Canina tried to imagine the views that could be perceived along the road in ancient times, in the stretch closest to Rome. So you can see a sort of survey drawing to the left, and something that he imagined was the situation in ancient times. So of course, it's something that modern times archaeologists would condemn, because there is I would say too much fantasy. But what we can say is that probably he wasn't so wrong in imagining a very urban landscape, especially in the stretch just next to the city. I would say even within the city, because as evidence show us still now, monuments, mainly tombs, were aligned with very little open space left. So we should imagine something very much built. Anyone traveling along the Via Appia in the Roman suburb alternated the continuous vision on the sides of a long series of tombs, beyond which the villas and the inhabited settlements could be seen. Photographs from the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century give us an idea of the Appia landscape before the transformations of the last century, like this one, which frames the vineyards outside Porta San Sebastiano, or this photo dating back to 1880 that shows us the desert made of grass of the shepherd land surrounding Villa dei Quintili, and those taken between 1902 and 1913 by English archaeologist Thomas Ashby during his travels along the Via Appia. The historical significance of the road's monuments and the charm of its ruins have meant that Via Appia has been at the center not only of study, excavation, and restoration commitments, but also of passionate appeals for its protection and ambitious proposal for its accommodation. There is no time here to talk about Raphael and his letter to Pope Leo X, and we can only mention the rhetorical imperial cults of the Napoleonic era, which for Rome, second city of the empire, envisaged the creation of an archaeological park, which was to include the Capitoline Hill, the Roman Forum, the Palatine Hill, to join with the Via Appia. It will only be enough to highlight how immediately after Rome became the capital of Italy, the 1883 town plan designated the monumental area and the first stretch of the Appian Way as public gardens, as you can see in the image to the left. In 1887, ministers Guido Baccelli and Ruggero Bonghi laid out the large park connecting the Roman Forum and the Palatine Hill through the archaeological walk to the first stretch of the Appian Way. At that time, it was even envisaged the creation of a single grandiose park that would cross the peninsula from the Tyrrhenian Sea to the Adriatic, along the entire route of the Appian Way from Rome to Brindisi. The archaeological walk was built in 1914 based on a design by Jacopo Boni, Rodolfo Lanciani, and Nicodemo Severi. The park extended itself between the slopes of the Aventine and the Celian Hills, from the Baths of Caracalla to the Circum Maximus, but had a short life. Already at the end of the 1930s, it was largely dismantled with the construction of the first trunk of the Via Imperiale, now Viale delle Terme di Caracalla, and then Viale Cristoforo Colombo, in anticipation of a universal exhibition scheduled for Rome in 1942. In 1913, Superintendent Antonio Muñoz started a plantation of cypresses and pines along the Via Appia, according to the fashion of that time. In the 1920s, pines became the symbol of the road, even mentioned in the famous 1924 symphonic poem Pines of Rome by Ottorini Respighi. During fascism, the Via Appia became part of the propaganda scenario, linked to the renewal of the myth of ancient Rome. In 1927, Parco degli Scipioni was completed based on a project by Raffaele De Vico as an extension of the archaeological walk. The park was built on top of the underground tombs restored in the same years by Cesare Valle, who a few years later would design the Via dell'Impero together with Antonio Muñoz. At the beginning of the 20th century, the building expansion that characterized the other cultural streets did not concern Appia Antica. The protection of a large portion of territory around the road, highly representative of a characteristic of the Roman countryside, falls within the context of the beginnings of a discipline of landscape protection in Italy. The green wedge, you can see actually in orange color to the right, around Appia Antica in the Rome town plan of year 1931, follows by a few years the first law on the protection of natural and landscape beauty, la Law Croce, Benedetto Croce Law, number 778 of year 1922. The detailed plan with landscape value for the Caffarella to the left area, drawn by Plinio Marconi, who is one of the fathers of contemporary town planning in Italy, in 1937, is an explicit and conscious anticipation of the contents of the Bottai Law, number 1497 of year 1939. The plan included no buildings allowed on large part of the territory, a system of public parks on the slopes of the Caffarella Valley, a network of pedestrian paths overlooking panoramic points, a series of new crossing roads on the motorway in the Caffarella Valley. So you can see shadows and lights, of course, but it's a very important plan, and actually it wasn't very much known until a few times ago. A new road to the west of Appia Antica called Appia Nuovissima. At that time in the year 1937, they were already conscious of the risks of car traffic, so they decided to develop a new road to the west in order to avoid car traffic to cross the ancient road, a problem which still now is present in our park. After World War II, the protection for the Appia Archaeological Park, drawn up in 1959 by architect Luigi Moretti in view of the 1960 Olympic Games, turned out to be a low barter between the landowners and the municipality. In fact, the plan envisaged the construction of approximately, and you can see in the map to the left, 200 buildings in the Caffarella Valley. The operation was foiled thanks to the incessant work of archaeologist and journalist Antonio Cederna, to the top. In year 1953, Cederna had published in Pannunzio's Mondo the first of a long series of articles on the Via Appia, entitled The Gangster of Appia Antica, where the serious state of degradation and alteration of the Regina Viarum was denounced. The following year, it was affixed by law the landscape constraint on a vast area around the Appia Antica. So the action of journalists actually made the public administration move and put a constraint by law in order to protect landscape. Cederna's journalistic activity will soon be joined by the technical scientific one of Professor Vittorio Calzolari, to the right bottom, a pioneer of landscape architecture in Italy who always has to be reminded because she had a paramount importance for the protection of the Via Appia. In year 1960, the territorial landscape plan of the Via Appia was approved, provided for a buffer zone with absolute no building along the Via Appia and the monumental areas, which is only the yellow stripe, so very narrow protection. We are in the years of a big development in Italy, 1960. So probably the pressure by developers was so strong that protection was at risk. And there is even a sort of trick, because in green color, what you could imagine was public park, actually is not park at all, but it's areas that can be built even with important, let's say, occupation of soil. And in this light blue color, it's areas which are actually developable. And so it's the area where all the villas, the very famous villas of the 1950s and early 60s were built and still now characterize a big part of our park. In year 1965, the town plan of Rome designated the entire Appia Antica area as a public park. So some important conquests arrived thanks again to the action of Antonio Cederna and Vittorio Calzolari, also thanks to the pressure of the association Italia Nostra. In year 1976, a proposal for the layout of the Appia Antica Park was presented by the Roman section of Italia Nostra, signed by a group of experts coordinated by Vittorio Calzolari. The proposal constituted the first overall plan for the Appia, with the integration of archaeological, historical, documentary, and naturalistic aspects. However, it remained on paper. Among the main contents of the Italia Nostra plan were particular attention to the system of waterways with their valleys, the reforestation of all slopes of the Capo di Bove lava flow and the surrounding valleys, the provision of 2 large wooded areas on the plateaus, the recovery of quarry reservoirs for recreational use. As you can see, it's a very ecological-oriented plan, because you should imagine that Vittorio Calzolari in the 1950s went to Harvard thanks to a Fulbright fund, and she had the chance to learn from the States the most modern ideas applied to landscape in the field of ecology. And so she applied these ideas in the 1950s, 1960s, and again in the years afterwards, also to the cultural landscape. Thanks to the battles of Antonio Cederna and the proposals of Vittorio Calzolari, today we have 2 parks, a naturalistic one at the regional level and an archaeological one at the state level. In year 1988, the Appia Antica Suburban Regional Park from Rome to the Castelli Romani was established. In year 1993, Antonio Cederna was appointed president of the park consortium. In this context of great importance are the interventions of archaeological superintendents of Rome on the threshold of year 2000 in view of the Jubilee. Thanks to Adriano La Regina, superintendent, and Rita Paris, responsible for the Appia, major excavation and restoration works ended with the opening to the public of Villa dei Quintili and the mausoleum of Cecilia Metella. In the following years, areas and monuments were acquired from private owners and then integrated in the visit circuit, such as the farmhouse of Santa Maria Nova and Villa di Capo di Bove, symbol of the Appia, which can and must be returned to the citizens and custodian of the Antonio Cederna archive. In year 2016, the Appia Antica Archaeological Park was established as an institute of the Ministry of Culture, which combines the task of superintendency with those of a museum. As mentioned, one of the most important activities for the creation of a large Appia Antica public park are new acquisitions. Among these, the recent entry of the Mausoleum of Sant'Urbano at the 4th mile of the Appia, not to be in some way confused with the Sant'Urbano Church in the Caffarella Valley, and the future headquarters of our park in Villa Massenzia. They both have considerable strategic as well as scientific value. Our park manages a series of sites that range from the single monuments such as Cecilia Metella to vast archaeological areas such as Villa dei Quintili and Villa di Sette Bassi. The park public is mainly made up of weekend goers who, especially during springtime and autumn, are attracted by the various cultural activities such as educational workshops, exhibitions, and concerts. An important exhibition displayed the long-distance walk along the Via Appia by Paolo Rumiz. This was 4 years ago. Exhibitions range from arts to sciences, including the important archaeological display, Patrimonium Appia. Next exhibition will be based on the experience of National Geographic photographer Andrea Frezzetta and on the history of the 20th century art and architecture of the park. So you are very welcome to come to visit our park in May, 18th of May, for the inauguration of the Appia Moderna exhibition, which will talk about architecture and art in the 20th century. And at the beginning of June, on the 6th of June, we'll inaugurate this exhibition about by photographer Andrea Frezzetta, who had the chance to travel like Paolo Rumiz a few years afterwards along the entire route, and he reported on National Geographic his tour, and we will display it in an immersive situation. Festivals are also very important. And so we have festivals really of every nature, from music to activities for families, hiking, and also travel festivals. But of course, music is probably one of the most important activities that can attract public, as I was saying, big part of our public is local citizens who are attracted by these activities. Of course, they have to be suitable, sustainable in some way in our sites, but of course we are not going to organize rock concerts. It's mainly jazz music, theater, so activities very light and compatible. And all the exhibitions and also most of the festivals, I always remind us that they show some aspects of our heritage. They don't talk about something which has nothing to do with the Appia heritage. Every time Appia is such a big container of many different stories that we can really range from arts, liberal arts to sciences, every time talking about Appia with some aspect which is less obvious. Of course, archaeology is one of the most important, and so we displayed Patrimonium Appia, but this just finished a few months ago. Of very big importance is also augmented reality on display in Cecilia Metella and Santa Maria Nova. To better understand and appreciate the Appia Antica Archaeological Park, an app has been made available which describes a wide selection of itineraries aimed at discovering the park territory and its heritage. The identified routes touch over 130 points of interest, each of which identifies an archaeological, cultural, environmental, or historical relevance. This is called Itinerary Appia, and you can see the website at the bottom. Our park is directly involved in the Appia Regina Viarum project for the Via Appia long distance walk. Our work aims at enhancing the last portion of the road in the municipalities of Ciampino and Marino that weren't included in the important works for the Jubilee of year 2000. The main features of the Canina project, such as the Macere, will be restored as well as the crepidines. You should imagine that the plantation of trees more than 100 years ago, of pines and cypresses, has raised the level of soil and so has covered in most cases the crepidines. So this work will be mainly of restoring the road, what still remains of the ancient road, but in particular I would say we will restore by means of excavating the soil of the crepidines. This is just an image to give an idea. Of course, this is a rendering that can, in some cases, create some panic, but it's a restoration work. Our park will benefit of a recovery plan funds thanks to the URBS project from the city to the Roman Campagna. URB projects include 3 systemic interventions together with the Museo Nazionale Romano and 2 series of restoration works on both the Via Appia and Via Latina, the main cultural assets of the park. The fulcrum of the project is the knowledge and narration of long-term stratification showed both in the landscape and the museum collections, from the Roman era to the moment of crisis and transformation of the city up to the Middle Ages and the modern age. In the latter period, the conspicuous archaeological finds, particularly appreciated in the Grand Tour, triggered the phenomenon of massive artistic collecting, of which evident elements are found in the museum collection which also house works from the area between the Via Appia and the Via Latina. Punctual works have been identified depending on the sites, which are essential for an overall recovery of assets. The project is divided into 2 actions, which concern, on one hand, the consolidated and well-known territorial system of the Appia Antica, and on the other hand, the area of the Via Latina, which can reveal new and important cultural experiences. The interventions are articulated on several levels: systemic interventions, archaeological excavations, restorations, and refunctionalizations, with a view to a deeper knowledge of a territory and a wider fruition by the public. Systemic interventions intend to strengthen the existing connections between the park and Museo Nazionale Romano by implementing a museum network between the city and a significant part of the Roman countryside. The first systemic intervention, web platform for knowledge and communication, focuses on the development of a digital space for the conservation, management, and promotion of the enormous knowledge from the Appia Antica Archaeological Park. The web platform, www.movieappia.it, virtually aims to collect the huge cultural heritage belonging to the park, still in situ or preserved in our Italian or foreign institutes. The findings are geo-referred on a digital cartographic base. The web platform will offer various contents, virtual tours with 360 shots that allow to walk through our sites in order to plan or to plan a visit or to appreciate sites that are currently inaccessible to the public. LIS video, the sites shared by means the Italian language sign in order to increase accessibility, 3D reconstructions of various monuments of a park that allow to appreciate and better understand the site, and this mainly thanks to our collaboration. We collaborate with almost 20 universities from all over the world, and so their scientific work, a selection of it, is being incorporated in our movie virtual museum. Photography, very high resolution digital acquisition from cards, plates, stereoscopies, and photographic historical archives will be available and directly connected to the regional context in the park. Art, a collection of works of art that show the Appia Park as seen through the eyes of famous artists with very high resolution works of art and graphics, above all connected with the Grand Tour. Archaeology, the main findings, stores in our sites and in museums all over the world with a virtual recreation of the sculptures, aerial images, cinema, literature, advertisement, and press. The Movie Appia Digital Library represents a new type of communication that helps to plan a visit, prepare research, or enhance on-site visit with new contents, both on the park and of the museum that hosts the collections. The second systemic intervention, sustainability and efficiency, aims to improve the energy efficiency of the properties managed by the park. Typical farmhouses and villas in the Roman countryside, which represent reserves of environmental quality and cultural poles within the context partially attacked by urban development, and indeed a testimony of the dominant agricultural landscape until the first half of the 20th century. The project stems from the need to identify the technological solutions suitable for improving the performance and management costs of the structures. The goal is not simply to maximize energy savings, but to identify and test which energy optimization modes are most compatible with protected sites. The buildings have been subjected to energy diagnosis. The first systemic intervention, access and info point enhancement, concerns the upgrading of rest stops and improving accessibility to state-owned areas. Specifically, it envisions the refunctionalization as info points of one or more buildings under the management of the archaeological park near the rest stops and access points to the state-owned areas from the local road system. The area, with an extension of about 1 hectare, housed some disused military buildings now in ruins. It is located just a 10-minute walk from Rome's second civilian airport, in the municipality of Ciampino, a destination for mainly European air connections. The degradation of the area is a serious detractor of the landscape of the park and offers room for uncontrolled uses. The project aims to create a parking lot for intermodal exchange and visitor services built in the ruined structures that will be restored and equipped with sustainable technologies, info point, toilets, device, and electric bike charging, bike rental, etc. Let's see some interventions along both Via Appia and Via Latina. So most of the interventions, we just saw the 3 systemic interventions. The other interventions are mainly restorations, and they are organized along the 2 main heritage assets of our park, which are Via Appia and Via Latina. Total budget for the Via Appia is 14 million euros. For the monuments along the road, budget is 2.7 million euros. Most of them were restored for in year 2000 for the Jubilee of year 2000, but not all of them. So some of them need a new restoration because 20 years have passed, but of course, many others weren't restored. So this is a new chance for great restoration works along the Via Appia. Interventions include the restoration of a Roman cistern just next to the Sant'Urbano monument, and the famous Mausoleum of Gallienus, a restoration work that was started a few years ago and then stopped for a long time. Now it's the chance to finish it, and it's particular to consolidate the structure, which has some problems. The beautiful 1920s fox hunting listed building will be transformed in the first hostel for the Via Appia long-distance hikers. This is a very interesting building by an architect not so famous, but he was in some way collaborating with Gustavo Giovannoni, who is the founder of a Faculty of Architecture just next to this building. So it's a building of paramount importance. It was approved by Antonio Munoz when he was a superintendent, and it's, of course, it was housing these activities linked to fox hunting, which is now illegal. So it was abandoned for a few decades, and now it's a chance to reuse it in a sustainable way. We also listed this building, but because you should imagine that our park is listed for the landscape in the entire territory. It's listed for archaeology in part, and it's almost absent. They're almost absent listed buildings. It's quite strange because we have a lot of farmhouses with great values. So we are starting to list also these buildings. Total budget for Via Latina is 14.7 million euros. Two interventions are located in the Campo Barbarico area, and they include the restoration and enhancement of a mausoleum transformed in a barn and the reuse of Torre del Fiscale. Torre del Fiscale is a 30 meters high medieval tower built at the junction of the ancient aqueducts at one corner of the Campo Barbarico that you probably well know. A staircase will be added inside the tower, allowing people to enter the ancient aqueducts, as you can see here. The staircase will allow people to enter the aqueduct, so this will be an impressive experience. And transforming the monument in a museum and an outlook tower on the Roman landscape. Timeline, unfortunately, is very rigid. As you can see, you probably know that these are national funds linked to the European funds of the recovery plan. And so our target was start of works last March, and we just started works last March. And we have to finish all works by the end of year 2026. So it's a big challenge. And with this big challenge, I have ended my presentation, but I'm of course ready to answer to all the questions, especially maybe for about these projects. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. It was really stimulating, especially as very few of us have a background in this kind of side initiatives for the outreach and the promotion of heritage. And I am particularly interested in the idea of looking at the path of the Via Appia as something also targeted to hikers. My question stems a little bit from my side interest for Grand Tour and the walking on this kind of routes as a sort of recovery of this ancient practice and its potential mingling with hiking. And how much of the Via Appia is used by hikers?
At present, almost nobody.
Nobody.
Let's
Let's
be honest. It's something for pioneers.
Okay.
For Rumis, Prazzetta, and few others.
Okay.
Because it's still not signed, so there are no signposting.
Okay.
So it's very hard. The Ministry of Culture is working on it. Actually, it's quite a long time they are working on it. So, but it takes time to restore an ancient road, which wants to be also a modern hiking path. It's not so easy.
Right.
You need time, you need money, and the ministry is making an effort. Sometimes a bit, let's say, more convinced, sometimes a bit less convinced. So something is going on, but not so quickly as it should have been. Apparently, this works for the whole stretch. We coordinate the enhancement, but we are not managing directly the works which are managed by the ministry. The Ministry of Culture is directly managing these works for the hiker safety, of a pedestrian safety. And this is twinned with another important activity by the ministry, which is the UNESCO proposal. In next July, UNESCO meeting will be held in New Delhi, and they will have to vote for our proposal for Appia Antica from Rome to Brindisi. If everything goes right, we hope so, Appia Antica will be the 60th World Heritage Site, Italian World Heritage Site. So it would be a great chance, because this gives you, it's of course primarily an important role to some way give this asset to the whole world, and to, according to the declaration of these universal values. But of course, it's also very important because Appia, it's already well known, but it will be even more known. And so in some way, the project for the long distance walk will benefit. So the two things are intertwined in some way, even if they are completely different. Because the works for the pedestrian safety, in some cases, can interfere with, interact negatively with the protection issues. For example, if you have to make pedestrian crossing, there are some little interventions that are not only restoration, you see, so you have to find the balance. Of course, it's a big challenge, because Appia Antica would be one of the first long distance walk with no religious issues, such as Camino Santiago, Via Francigena, which nowadays the religious motivation is not, it's just for a minority of people. But of course, this helps at the beginning. In this case, the Appia probably started a bit too much in a system top-down, which doesn't facilitate. That's why we are going slowly on that project. I don't know if I answered.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Any questions from the audience? Chris, thank you.
Thank you for the really interesting talk, and particularly to hear about the developments around Tor Fiscale that sound very interesting. As a group with the students, so the other day we did the first mile of the Via Appia up to Porto San Sebastiano, and then later on in the course, we're going to go from Villa dei Quintilli down to Caicchiglia Metella. And the reason partly for this is because we can't see everything, but also because that stretch in between kind of the second and the third mile between Quo Vadis and then San Sebastiano, and you kind of just touched on this, it's not just that it's not very pleasant to walk, it's incredibly dangerous to walk at the moment. And it's private property on one side and then kind of a sheer tooth cliff on the other side. So do you envisage that being taken back? I mean, it's all very well that hitchhikers or hikers are going to start at the third mile and go further. Do you envisage them being able to reclaim some of that land, or it's a future pedestrianization? And then also just to follow up, to go from Caicchiglia Metella to the Caffarella or vice versa also requires walking along the road. So I know you just touched on it, but maybe could say a little more about how this might all be linked up for pedestrians.
No, thank you very much for the question. I didn't talk about this issue because actually it's not directly managed by us because it's a municipality managed road. But I can say, I hope, let's cross fingers, let's say, maybe this is a good chance to have some results because there are two projects. One is called GRAB, but it's also a bike and pedestrian route that will surround the city. And for a long portion will cross Appia. And so you will have a protected lane for bikers and walkers on that stretch, which is very dangerous. So this is, the works will start in a few months, this summer. Together with this action, also we call it ZTL, congestion zone in English. So an area with a limitation of traffic. It was almost everything ready. We gave all our allowances for this because it's so much important. Of course, there is an impact because you have to place some cameras, but the impact of cars is much worse. So we gave all the allowances to put these cameras, but then something happened because you need an allowance from the Ministry of Transport. And in this case, municipalities on one side, the government on the other side, this doesn't facilitate. So something that was almost ready is now stopped. But we write letters, and we hope that something will happen. I'm quite sure that the UNESCO inscription will give us, I would say, it will be compulsory to find a solution at that moment. We cannot wait again, still more time. I don't know if I answered to this. Yes.
There are two questions. Robert, do you have a question? Okay, because there those are two online ones, but yes.
Thank you very much, Simone. I was very interested by the question of the trees, because everyone alive today always thinks of the Appia. It's impossible to think of it without trees. But the photographs you showed by Ashby, it was like a wilderness, sort of a desert. Is it the case now that the pine trees from the 1920s are coming to the end of their life?
That's a big problem.
And what are you going to do now?
100 years is almost a time limit for pines, you know? That's a big problem. Some of them are dying. And this, in some way, puts us in a position of having to take some decisions, you know? So, as you were saying, pines now are a symbol of Appia. On this portion, not in other places. It changes. And it's, as I was saying, it's a total invention of early 1900s. But of course, it has now a cultural value. So these trees have to be replaced, even if they can cause some problems to archaeology, because in this case, landscape issues, let's say, are so important that they have to live together with the archaeology. Probably in ancient times, as I was saying, there were no lines of trees. It's more likely that there were little gardens around the monuments, shrubs, flowers. There is actually no room for trees. So it's a problem. I would say to be selective. So we will plant again just in the most iconic places. In other cases, it's much better, and Vittorio Calzolari taught us to renaturalize some areas where you have room and you don't have interference with archaeology, you know, much better. I know that some people will get crazy for this, but landscape changes. As you were saying, the Ashby photographs, but the project by Canina, there are no trees. And landscape for centuries, the Roman Campagna was a desert of grass, you know. So what is better? So some pines are iconic, they will stay. Some other, they can be moved. They also cause problems to archaeology. So I would say that archaeology probably has, in most cases, first position.
I think that this discussion has answered to the question by Ian Woodstrap, who was wondering whether there is evidence for planting of trees along the Via Appia. And I agree. I don't really see why the Roma state would have
We don't know anything.
intervened?
Unfortunately, there are not many studies
Uh-huh.
about plants in ancient times along the Via Appia. There are many in the Palatine Hill.
Mhm.
So, for example, for some universities, they are very welcome to come and make this kind of studies. I would say that in this portion of the road, was very little room for trees in line, you know, and trees in line are very much linked to a fashion that started in the 1600s. So we don't know much about the Roman times. Probably they were, but not in this area. It's very difficult to imagine it.
There's another online question from Valerie Higgins, who's asking if all the funding for this project is coming for public funds or if you envisage collaboration with private companies.
As I was saying, it's a 30 million euros investment. It's public. It's public, and I have to be honest. I know the importance of involvement of private sector. I'm totally aware of this, but 30 million euros, they will never come from the from the private sector. So I have to say that the Italian government, not just this, but even the ones before, has to invest a little bit more for heritage, because we are the bottom of a list compared to France, Germany, and we have an important heritage, archaeological, but not only archaeological. So public funds are fundamental. 30 million euros, there is no private company that they will give you, and 30 million euros someone can think they are a lot. They are not a lot at all. For example, I didn't talk about the Claudius Aqueduct. We are restoring some portions. We were estimating a few years ago that 20 millions were needed. Now we know for sure that 40 millions are needed for the restoration of just for the aqueduct. So you need a lot of money. So private company, okay, they're very welcome. For example, we have some revenues, very important, not for sponsorships, because we are in the outskirts of a city. So it's not very, let's say, attractive, our place, unfortunately. But for example, we are very requested cinema location, because very near Cinecittà. And thanks to cinema shooting in our areas, we have a revenue which is quite important, but of course, it can be reinvested for maintenance, not for big restorations.
No, and also, if I may just add in, public funds should be something you can count on year after year. Private sponsorship is una tantum. Normally,
yes,
you can have donations.
Yes.
And
let's say another thing I can say about funding. We have this big opportunity thanks to the recovery plan, but these are investments una tantum. Every year we have a budget which is very low. But I don't want to make complaints here, you know. So Valerie is telling me, are you doing a good job in finding private sector money? We are trying, but not 30 million. It's impossible.
You just mentioned that the Parco Archeologico is not, so to speak, attractive. And in a sense, I agree that it is outside of the main tourist routes and tourist paths and experiences in Rome. However, it is unique in its combination of landscape of archaeology and even of the opportunity that it offers to have a look at the evolution of the landscape of Rome throughout the centuries. So it's something that is absolutely unique. And I wonder if alongside interventions on the material essence of the park, I wonder if initiatives are being going on as regards making it more attractive, more known, and promoting the aspect of the
as
park.
you were saying, we are already attractive. Our problem is that we are far away from the main tourist flows, which are within the city center. People on average stay 2 days in Rome. So you cannot imagine them to go to Appia instead of Colosseum, you know? It's impossible. Of course, we have to work for people who stay more days and people who come back again, which is our target, because Appia is not for everybody, which is enough. It's enough. But we have one big problem, which is some way we already talked about, which is accessibility. We just have 2 buses. They very rarely respect the timetable. So every tourist which has the most important resource is time for a tourist. If you have to waste 2 hours to reach our places, we are not competitive, you know.
No.
So we have to work on that, not just us, but the municipality. We are working. I am pushing for this, and it's also very important to move away the cars and make it safe for pedestrians, because if we create this pedestrian safe path between the Circo Maximus and the Appia, tourists will come. Now they find the Appia, they see all these cars. Many people actually.
No, and people run that road. I have the first-hand experience, and also I guess you said tourists who come back, but also locals. I know an insane number of Romans who have never been to the Villa of Maxentius or to the Villa of the Quintili, because first, we are really lazy and really spoiled, and we live on the assumption that if something is in our backyard, we have all the time to go, and we basically never commit to go. But it's not a place where you randomly pass by. You have to go there on purpose and commit to visit the park. So it's a multiple target, both tourists and locals. Claire.
Thank you so much. I have a question related to something you said at the beginning. You were showing us maps in the 1950s and 1960s, and you talked about the explosion of development and building of private villas along the Appia, in the Appia area. And I wanted to ask, what is the policy of the public administration in relation to those existing private ownerships of places very close to sensitive and important sites like Cecilia Metella? Do you have a working relationship with these people? Is it a tense situation? Is it a friendly situation? How would you approach doing big interventions, for example, when, say, half the building is on private land?
It's an important question, thanks. There is not just one answer, because the situations are different. In some cases, we buy these villas. For example, Capo di Bove was a private-owned villa, and it has been transformed to a museum. And the seat of the place where the Antonio Celern archive is kept. But this is, of course, you can do sometimes. It's not the solution for the hundreds of villas we have. In most cases, we have just to avoid that they continue building, you know. And many villas are not residential villas. Now they have been transformed in settings for marriages, which is an activity that in some way is publicly oriented, you know, so it's not totally private. If you organize a party, you can go there. So it is actually a place where you can go. Of course, it's monofunctional, so it's very negative, because the presence of residents in some way is also a guarantee of activities like bars, restaurants, which are closing down. So it's not only a negative aspect, the fact that there are some villas. Of course, it's something, if you have stopped it before, now we would have a public park. In the year 1965, that all the area, 2,500 hectares were declared public park. But that was at that time. Now it's too late. You cannot imagine to expropriate, but it's not even, the plan doesn't say this. Residents have the right to stay there. They cannot build much, so actually the values of these villas are normal. So that's why we can afford sometimes to buy them. And very often they ask us to buy the place. And we actually, I didn't tell this, we are actually, thanks to some funding by the Ministry of Culture, we actually, because one of the big, there were some big landowners. These areas were mainly shepherd land owned by the aristocratic Roman families. One of these was the Torlonia, a very recent aristocratic family. They were buying lands from other more ancient aristocratic families. So this area of Appia is actually mainly was owned by the Torlonia family. And part of these Torlonia properties are now owned by the Fondazione Gerini, run by the Salesiani priests. And they actually selling most of their land, and we are buying a lot of properties. But our ministry allow us to buy just the places where there are archaeological sites, not big, let's say, farm or just agricultural land. So we actually, a policy is to buy. Sant'Urbano was transformed in a place for marriages and other kind of activities, leisure activities. We bought it. It's the best thing to manage it, because to convince an owner of a villa, which is private by definition, where they have the swimming pool, to make it accessible for the public to see some monument, it's not so easy. We should work more on this. Like, for example, this opportunities to open villas, you know. We are working on that, which is something. It's not like having a public property, but it's something. There are hundreds of villas, so it's not easy to give an overall answer. It depends. Priority is to buy them. In the 1960s, they still thought it was possible. Now it's a bit too late, but we can still try to make it public. Even if it's an expense, and Valerie would tell me, but your budget is low, be careful not to buy everything. But it's the best way to protect places, as I think. Of course, if private owners, in many cases, they are very sensible to the aspect of archaeology. So there are no risks like before. In the 1960s, where they were building on top of archaeology, now this phenomenon has stopped. So we don't have to rush, you know, everything is quite safe. But we have to buy and to make some agreements with the private sector. And it's different if they live there or if they organize parties, you know, it's a very different situation. Because with those who organize parties, you can find some agreement in organizing some festivals together, for example, and so make it open in a wider way. I don't know if I answered properly.
Any other questions from our live audience? I don't have any other questions online. Okay, I guess we can continue our discussion upstairs. Please stay with us for a glass of wine or prosecco and some crisps, and join me in another round of applause